Such an account of the atom is plausible because energy is, quote, merely the name for the quantitative aspect of a structure of happenings. In short, it depends on the notion of the functioning of an organism, end quote. That's Whitehead from Science in the Modern World. A footnote, a more in-depth description of atomic and subatomic particles as being themselves organisms in the sense we attempted to describe here can be found in Chapter 8 of Science in the Modern World. Without some process of self-organization, whether it is deemed autopoietic or concrescent, atoms could not emerge out of the flux of energetic happenings. If we grant that evolution is a, quote, universal acid, leaking out of biology and into all other sciences, forever altering their foundational concepts, much of the order in the cosmos comes into greater focus. As Whitehead says, the whole point of the theory is that more complex organisms arise from less complex organisms. Quote, the doctrine of evolution thus cries aloud for a conception of organism as fundamental for nature. It also requires an underlying activity, a substantial activity, expressing itself in individual embodiments and evolving in achievements of organism. The organism is a unit of emergent value, a real fusion of the characters of eternal objects, emerging for its own sake. End quote. The reigning cosmology in contemporary physics is the Big Bang Theory. It does seem that such a model fits perfectly with an evolutionary account of the cosmos, where unexpected achievements of emergent value are created at every juncture. Supposing the universe emerged from the Big Bang, we can recognize hydrogen and helium atoms as among the first organisms to self-organize a few minutes later. They are the parents of all other atoms formed when these primordial elements are fused. In order for this fusion to take place, the next unit of emergent value had to evolve. Stars. The first generation of stars was huge, about 100 times the mass of our sun. After a million years or so, these stars exploded into gigantic supernovas, creating heavier elements and leaving behind massive black holes. These black holes eventually gathered enough matter to become galaxies, the next individual embodiment of emergent value. Within these galaxies, smaller stars formed, and around them orbiting the next organism to arise in this cosmic evolution, planets. Upon what we can only assume is a countless number of planetary bodies, the potential for further evolution in the form of traditional organisms was made possible. From prokaryotes to eukaryotes to multicellular species, the same process of creative advance continues. We can further cement this account of cosmic evolution by pointing to Whitehead's claim that, quote, the community of actual things is an organism, but it is not a static organism. It is an incompletion in process of production. Thus the expansion of the universe in respect to actual things is the first meaning of process, and the universe in any stage of its expansion is the first meaning of organism. End quote. The cosmos as a whole is here described as a living organism, better termed a cosmic concrescence. It is incomplete in itself, and so is necessarily a process of becoming. It is the prototype for all subsequent organic forms, or as Whitehead says, quote, each actual entity repeats in microcosm what the universe is in macrocosm. End quote. The incomplete and subsequently processual nature of the universe can again be related to the second law of thermodynamics and the arrow of time it establishes. Whitehead says of the future of the universe, quote, it is merely real without being actual, end quote, whereas the past is a nexus of actualities, end quote. He goes on to say of the present that it is, quote, the immediacy of teleological process whereby reality becomes actual, end quote. Margulis points to the, quote, geometry of the universe's expansion, end quote, to account for its ever-increasing creative possibilities for gradient reduction. We might say that the past, as actual, is thermodynamically forced to become the future because of the tendency of energy to seek equilibrium by breaking down previously established gradients. The teleological process whereby reality becomes actual is in fact empirically observable on a cosmic scale. As Margulis says, quote, purposefulness is an offshoot of the thermodynamic tendency to come to equilibrium, end quote. We may not go so far as to call it an offshoot, though. We must still account the purposes of individuals, account for the purposes of individuals, as Whitehead does, by coming to see the universe as an organism made of organisms, quote, a community of actual things. Margulis's thermodynamic reduction, though it beautifully expresses the continuity of nature, neglects its atomicity. Footnote, Prigogine defines thermodynamics as, quote, the study of the macroscopic properties of a system and their relations without regard to the underlying dynamics. We can only wonder what will become of our universe when it reaches its final satisfaction and becomes the datum for a new occasion of cosmic concrescence. Conclusion. Into the integral. Quote, integral reality is the world's transparency, a perceiving of the world as truth, a mutual perceiving and imparting of the truth of the world and of man and of all that transluces both. End quote. Jean Gebser from The Ever-Present Origin. In The Ever-Present Origin, Gebser introduces two terms he feels exemplify the transparency and wholeness, typifying the integral structure of consciousness. The first is systasis, which refers to, quote, the conjoining or fitting together of parts into integrality. Gebser wishes to contrast the notion of systasis with that of a system, though not to imply that they are opposites. Systematization is still a feature of a three-dimensional, predominantly spatial world composed of parts. When we refer to a system, we describe the effect of some quantitative process of addition, thereby draining that process of any intrinsic life. We may, by way of a loose analogy, say that viewing an organism as a system converts it into a static collection of objects, whereas systasis allows the parts to become transparent, such that the organism is recognized as a subject perpetually becoming whole. The second term, syneresis, refers to the mode of perception adapted to understanding integral realities. Gebser says that it fulfills the aperspectival, integrative perception of systasis and system, this is a quote, and is preconditioned for diaphany, which is able to be realized when, in addition to systasis and system, the symbol, with its mythical effectivity and magic symbiosis are included, that is to say, present, end quote. Our claim is that Varela, and especially Whitehead, display a clear understanding of the need for a syneretic mode of perception that breaks free of the spatial categories and systematization endemic to the mental structure. Whitehead's analysis of concrescence is precisely an attempt to come to terms with organisms as systatic, which coincidentally is Greek for, quote, put together, with the connotation of forming, linking it closely with the meaning of concrescence, which is a growing together. As Whitehead says, quote, we have to discover a doctrine of nature which expresses the concrete relatedness of physical functionings and mental functionings, of the past with the present, and also expresses the concrete composition of physical realities which are individually diverse, end quote. The related processes of concrescence and autopoiesis bring together each of the structures of consciousness in their attempt to make clear the organization of the living, uniting the systematic categorization of the mental through an appreciation of the molecular details of cellular metabolism, the circular polarity of the mythic through an appreciation for the self-catalyzing dynamics of cellular production, and the vital synchronicity of the magic through an appreciation of the deep relationship between subject and object, without becoming fixated upon any in particular. The transparency of the whole is thus made evident. It was not until the 20th century that time became fully apparent to our consciousness. Whitehead, a mathematician and a physicist, participated directly in the scientific revelation that our sensory experience of the heavenly bodies is delusory until we have an appreciation for eternity. That is, because light takes time to travel from distant stars and galaxies to our eyes. Part 9.